Okay, enough practice of just translating. Let's actually do some word problems. Here we have a machinist needs to use 2 shims for a combined thickness of 0.084 inches. One shim is to be 3 times as thick as the other. What are the thicknesses of the 2 shims? So I'm actually seeing a couple of different things here that I could translate into equations. I could see this one shim is to be 3 times the thickness of the other. So that is, the thickness of one is to be 3 times the thickness of the other. You could introduce multiple variables in a question like this, but we haven't seen, and we're not going to really see, the techniques for dealing with multiple variables. So instead, what I would say here is assign a variable to one of the numbers. In this case, the thicknesses of these 2 shims are both unknown. Thickness of the smaller and the thickness of the larger. These are the 2 unknowns that we're looking for. What are the thicknesses of the 2 shims? And so it's often quite natural to want to call them both variables. If I could call this x and y or whatever. But like I said, we want to only use one variable on this. So what I would want to do is I'd want to say, okay, if I call one of these a number, if I call one of them x, is it possible to refer to the other one using that number? Well, I know that this larger shim should be 3 times the thickness of the other. The larger one should be 3 times the thickness of the smaller. So if I refer to the thickness of the smaller shim as x, I could then refer to the thickness of the larger shim as 3x. That guarantees that whatever number this is going to be 3 times that number. So the reason I'm doing this is so that now, when I say the combined thickness of the 2 shims is 0.084 inches, well, the thickness of the first plus the thickness of the second, this is their combined thickness, and it should be equal to 0.084 inches. So like I said, I want to only use one variable here, and in order to use one variable, I had to kind of use the variable, assign it somewhere. In this case, I assigned it to the thickness of the smaller shim, and then I can then use that variable and say just multiply by 3 to refer to the thickness of the larger one. Then I'm able to plug the stuff into my equation here and actually set up the equation. But now that I have an equation, you'll find once you have an equation, you kind of don't really need to think about the context of the problem anymore. This is one of the really nice things about dealing with algebra. Once you translate into the world of algebra, you have all these rules that you can use to work with this. I can combine like terms. X plus 3x is 4x. And when I divide, to solve this, what I'd want to do is I'd want to divide both sides by 4. So I'd take 0.084, divide by 4, we get 0.021. So, however, x equals 0.021 isn't very meaningful by itself. Instead, you need to go back and see, okay, what did x mean? X was the thickness of the smaller shim. So the smaller shim must be 0.021, and the larger shim must be 3 times that. 3 times 0.021 is 0.063. So the 2 shims, the first one the smaller one would be 0.021 inches. The larger one would be 0.063 inches. This is a general technique that you can use to solve a lot of these problems.